What's up, guys and gals, and welcome back to the Nerd Castle. Today in the world of indie games, we're going to be taking another look at a title called Dungeons of Sundaria, a hack-and-slash dungeon-crawling RPG that's been in early access for about a year now. I know that it's been in development for about a year because that was the last time we covered the game and checked it on out. And I had some thoughts about the game, I had some critiques, I had some things that I thought it could be doing better, so I figured after a year it was time to check in and decide whether or not those things have been implemented and whether or not this is the kind of RPG that you want to play for yourself. If after watching this you wanted to get the game for yourself, I got a link for you down below in the description where you can check it on out. On top of that, you'll also find links to all my relevant social media, my Twitch stream, all that kind of stuff where I frequently go live with the games that I've been playing on the channel. Dude, is that like a... bro, it's like a xenomorph egg. You just messed up my entire intro by, like, invoking Giger here. But anyways, Dungeons of Sundaria. We checked in on it, like, a year ago. And it was one of those games that I think it didn't really, like, super stand out. Like, it didn't have a crazy amount of things going on. But at the same time, it was competently arranged enough that I gave it sort of like a passing nod. And I was like, okay, well, you know, if you like dungeon crawling, check it on out. I spent about 2 hours with the game last night. I started a new character from scratch just in case anything changed in the early dungeons. How do I get up there? This way. All right, let's see if we can get this guy real fast. He's trying to bomb me out with these weird little minty fresh skulls. We'll go ahead and take this guy down real quick. You're going to make a character, and this is a dungeon crawler. The best way that I would know how to describe it is like if you've ever done like a World of Warcraft dungeon, but you wanted that transposed into a third-person perspective action combat system instead of like, I mean, I guess it still has a hotkey system. It's just not tab target. But that having been said, if you wanted a game that is effectively a really, really, really big MMO dungeon that you can play with your friends with varying roles from tank to rogue to mage to cleric, which is what I'm playing right now, I think this game actually does a reasonably decent job at providing that. It's going to be a title that I think has a lot of jank in between the margins, and it's very, very clear to me that this game is made by a very small team. Like, I think that when you're like me and you cover games on a daily basis like this, I think what you'll run into is that they're kind of like these signs that a team is small, but they're ambitious, and they're kind of trying to get something done that's like bigger than their team. And this game has that in spades. This is one of those games that you can tell like they threw their everything on into it, but they were limited by budget, they were limited by time, they were limited by team. And this is a dungeon crawler. If you're looking for more than a dungeon crawler, so like a game that's gonna have like an absurd amount of like ridiculous side content and like a big helping of narrative and a lot of other things like that going on to accompany the hack and slash trappings that the game is going for, I think you're probably gonna be a little bit disappointed. But if you take this at face value for what it is, I actually kind of see it as almost like Gauntlet, but Gauntlet with a little bit more co-op put into it. So if you never played the Gauntlet games back in the day, those were very linear dungeon crawls as well, where you kind of like picked an adventuring holotype or an adventuring class, and you sort of just like churned and burned your way through a dungeon, and you didn't really think about it too much. Like, the classes didn't interplay with one another, there were no tanks, there were no healers, it was just you smashing stuff until eventually you ran out of keys or you ran out of health. This game is like that, but with like a little infusion of MMO on in there. It got like a little injection of MMO. What is this? You come across a rock with a strange symbol on it. Reaching out to the stone, you see a disturbing image of a creature. A deity, maybe? Upon touching it, you feel a strong desire pulling you deeper into the holler. You're not sure what you've gotten yourself into, but strange rocks, lizard people. You look through Laurent's journal and find a similar drawing. This must be the place that Laurent's grandfather wrote about. The symbols on this rock match some of those in the journal. You stash the journal back in your pack and turn to face the dark hollow. Doesn't seem too bad. If lizard men are the worst of it, you can handle this. You hope. Apparently there's like a little storyline snippet right there. Each dungeon does have its own storyline, but it's going to be really brief. So there's a town that you go back to in between each of these levels. And inside that town, there's a whole bunch of like NPCs, and they allow you to do various things. They're all inside kind of like nodes, I guess. So there's like a blacksmith shop. It's got like 3 or 4 guys inside of it. And then there's like an inn that's got 2 or 3 guys inside of it. So on and so forth. Wow, I'm getting shot with like a lot of things right now. Ah, there are crossbowmen everywhere. This is actually, oh no, dude, do I die? Oh, I can actually do like a schwimmy. Well, that's pretty cool. I didn't even know that we could swim. This is the first level that I've played so far that had any type of like liquid water inside of it. But as I was saying, there is a town node that you're gonna go back to before the end of the video. We'll go back there. What is that? There we go. Grab that right there. Who is still shooting me, dude? You. Stop that. Quit that right now. I don't have time for you right now. As I was saying for the third time, if these lizard men would stop pelting me in the face with projectiles that are pointy. Thank you, lizard man. You smell like a turtle tank and nobody likes you. Anyways, there's a town that you go back to. It's got NPCs inside of it. Those NPCs will give you varying quests. The quests don't seem to be anything original or crazy unique. They tend to just be stuff like go to dungeon, smash monsters until you get to end of dungeon. This is the kind of game that I think you're probably not going to need a huge amount of motivation anyways, because this is kind of like one of those games that's all about the loot hunt. So if you've ever played anything like Last Epoch or Diablo 2, or you've played anything along action RPG lines, this is clearly a game that's very heavily influenced by those as well. It's a game about loot scooping. As you can see from my chat down in the bottom left-hand corner, we've been looting stuff this entire time. I haven't had a chance to take a look at any of it and see if any of it fits our build, but the itemization seems to be fairly simple so far. And that's where we're gonna run into like one of our first problems. The loot feels very unstructured to me. And that's one of those things that like, it doesn't feel like there's predictable tiers that you move up through with like different names. So if you go back to like Diablo 2, for example, you could start out with sort of, you know, short swords, and then you move up to long swords, and then you move up to kopeshes, and you can kind of visually identify how far into the game you are by the loot that you're picking up. In this game, it all appears to just kind of be like randomly skinned, randomly itemized, random in terms of its sophistication. There doesn't seem to be like you working your way up from like less sophisticated armors to more rad armors. It all appears to be just totally and complete. I only knew that wall was destructible because I've seen it before in a dungeon when I got stuck. I do like the little things like destructible walls. We'll talk about that in a bit. But this game is all about the item hunt. If you're okay with the fact that the game really doesn't have like item tiers or anything to imply how far or how dope into the game you actually are, you just want to pick up random items that have different affixes and different colors and things like that on them, by all means go for it. But from what I've seen so far, the itemization doesn't appear to be super interesting or varied along the lines of like Diablo 2 or something like, oh, let's just take it in a roguelike direction, like Tales of Maj'Eyal. Tales of Maj'Eyal is a game that I think is itemized like impeccably well, where like even the procedural items are like ridiculously rad and can kind of dictate the way you play an entire build. This doesn't appear to be that sort of game, at least not to me. This appears to be the kind of game where the items just kind of have random stats on them, and you wait until you find something that linearly increases your stats. So, for example, these glorious pauldrons right here are pretty much like an all-around upgrade. They give us more spell power, which we want. They give us bonus spell power across our entire character. They make us crit a little bit harder. Basically, I hover over the item, and there's like things that my class needs as a cleric. I need health. I need spell power. I need like crit. And as long as all those things come through and they're green on the tooltip, I usually won't hesitate just to swap it out real fast like so. The good news is the character shows all your gear, and in fact, I've actually really liked the gear modeling in this game. It seems to nestle somewhere in between something like the art style of this game kind of catches me somewhere in between like World of Warcraft and like Divinity Original Sin, which I think is actually a pretty comfortable visual nook in my opinion. Like, it's one of the things I didn't expect. Oh, we got a new belt right there. Cool. Like, even your belt will change graphics. You can recolor. Every single piece on your character is dyeable with 3 different sections. There's a main, a minor, and a trim, I guess, so you can repaint your gear the second you get back to town. The game does come with a crafting system, as you can see here. Like, every set of dungeons has its own set, and you need to collect enough of, like, these little medallions or whatever to unlock it, and then you can craft it. The dungeon that I did, so the dungeons in this game are exceptionally long, like, they're, like, really, really big. All right, ow, okay. I can't express enough how big the dungeons are in this game. They are sprawling, enormous experiences that seem to be kind of inspired Is there another guy back there coming? Oh, that's not good. Is that like his homeboy? I don't know who that is. Either way, I'd rather not deal with it. This guy needs to go. Please die. Thank you. Oh god, there's so many of you. Okay, we killed Fern. That's fine. Plant-related ogres have now been removed from the equation. However, I'm getting chewed on a little bit by these guys. Luckily, they don't hit that hard. But the dungeons in this game are really long. The things that I would kind of compare it to is if you ever played vanilla World of Warcraft, which is actually an easier reference to make now than it was a couple years ago, now that Classic WoW is back. If you ever did Upper Blackrock Spire, or you ever did Blackrock Depths, or you ever did Sunken Temple, those are considered to be in vanilla WoW, like the long dungeons that you've got to have like a couple hours under your belt in order to run them. This game seems to be inspired by that wheelhouse, in my opinion. The dungeons are quite long, so like the first dungeon in this game, I think it took me 1 hour and 45 minutes to get through it playing solo. If I was playing with other players, and I had a few more people that had like DPS or something like that to add on in instead of playing a healer and solo like an idiot like I always tend to do, it probably would have gone a little bit quicker. I did enjoy that dungeon. It culminated in a fight that looked suspiciously similar to Diablo 3's Act 1 boss fight, the Skeleton King or whatever, but it was still enjoyable. I had a good time with it. The Skeleton King that I fought, he kind of bugged out a little bit and his summons didn't work properly, but it still felt pretty epic after 1.5 hours of dungeon crawling to run on through. I do think that the bosses could use another polish pass in order to get those bugs sorted out. And then I have felt like, as I was going through the first dungeon, there was probably 15 or 20 bosses. That's how long these are. Is like for 1 hour and 45 minutes, I would say like every 10 minutes you're getting to a boss. And I would have very much liked to have seen those bosses have some kind of like strategy that you have to learn. Or like more complex mechanics, I guess. It seems like almost every single boss I've fought so far just kind of like chases you, tries to close the gap, and tries to beat you to death. I would have liked, since the game is so heavily inspired by something like World of Warcraft, I would have liked to have seen some of the boss mechanics from there, with the way that you're supposed to handle the mob and the way that you're supposed to face the mob, and like little objects you have to interact with in order to like banish his shield, or you know, little interactions between the player and the boss would have been nice. The final boss, in my opinion, was the only one that kind of had a mechanic where you had to sort of focus on these little bone piles of corpses that were spewing out ads, and you had to figure out the gaps in order to kill those. But by and large, most of the boss fights in this game have been tank and spank so far. And so that's an area that I think the game could improve a lot, especially once it's done. Just go back through and like look at the bosses and figure out ways that you can, I mean, even if you end up copy-pasting from the millions of dead MMOs out there for strategies and things like that, I don't think anybody will mind, because it still breaks up the monotony a little bit. There are secrets in the dungeon, there are cracked walls, there are lootables like all over the place that you should definitely look around and try to find. The scenescapes do seem to get more complicated the further on into the game that you get. That's one of the reasons why last night I really knuckled down and I beat the first dungeon, even though it was like really long, is I mashed it out because I wanted to see the first dungeon. As far as visual design goes, you can kind of see them coming to grips with dungeon design. So the beginning of the first dungeon is very linear and takes you like you follow these T-shaped tracks all the way down into like a catacomb, and it's mostly like corridors. But then you see them start playing around with ideas. Well, what if we were in like a plague sewer? Okay, and like, what if we were inside of a ravine now? And by the time I got to the second level, you're actually starting to get caves and things that are starting to look pretty cool, and the level design is getting a little bit better. In addition, in the first level, there are a bunch of like switch puzzles and things like that that you have to do in order to advance. They're nothing too complicated, but if you miss the switches, you could lead yourself to a little bit of frustration. I have found that the animations in this game are very fluid, the impacts feel nice, the sound effects are well selected, and in fact, I think they do a lot of... Is this guy bugged? He's bugged. I think the sound effects and actually the animation design of the game do a lot of heavy lifting towards making you not notice the fact that other areas are clearly like the product of a small team. And so well done over there. Now, I need to go through my gear and figure out if there's anything that I want to use right now. I don't even know if it's worth it to be breaking all these crates and stuff. I suppose I could. I've got a couple different spells on this character. It feels like every few levels you unlock, or every level you unlock a new spell. This is not a game where you're going to hit like level 60. This seems to be a game where characters max out around like level 12 or level 15. So leveling up is supposed to be like a big deal in this game. Unfortunately, it usually just comes down to like you get 100 more HP and you maybe unlock a new ability. And in fact, we did do that. We got Holy Strike over here. You do have multiple gear sets if your character can have like melee ranged magic. And you set up actually different hotbars that auto swap when you swap in between those by hitting the tab key, which is nice. With this guy over here, I'll probably put that on my E key. Because, like, we're not really going to use Resurrection or, like, Chain Heal because we're not playing with other players. So I think putting it on my E key is perfectly fine. Let's go test this new ordinance out and see if it's any good. Yeah, it was pretty fun. I mean, it looked cool. I really, really liked calling it down on people. Looks like we've got ourselves a gnarly AoE right there that we can now circle on into the rotation. But I've now forgotten what I was talking about. I guess what I would end on there is that, like, on a positive level, I think of this game. Who are you? A reluctant blacksmith. Oh, I tried to murder somebody that was trying to help me. So this game functions on, like, checkpoints. You will know that you are near a checkpoint because you will arrive at these vendors that are inside the dungeon. And this is literally just a spot for you to unload all the loot that you've been carrying around with you. You can either salvage it into parts for crafting, or you can just right-click and sell it all as you see fit. It does take a little bit of time to get it going, though, sometimes. It will take you a little bit of time to void everything out of your inventory because you've got to do it manually by clicking. And also, the game is hooked up to the internet on some level, I think, because what you'll notice is as you're deleting items, occasionally one of them will pop back like that right over there like you just saw. And so I'm guessing this is hooked up to the internet in some way. Luckily, I did not notice any form of visual or network latency lag until I was inside these menus selling items. And so what that means is when you're actually in melee combat and whatnot, I haven't felt any of that. The other thing that they need to fix is while you're inside this menu, if you click anywhere that's not inside this window, your character will auto-attack. So that's one of those little sloppy things that just needs to be taken care of real quick. Disable the ability for the player to actually emote or do any activity while they're inside of a vendor menu. You also have to manually loot everything. I think this is also a really tedious mistake. So you have to loot every single body that hits the floor. Ooh, 1990s heavy metal or new metal references. But anyways, you have to loot every single body. If we go on through the options, you will not find like auto grab inside of here or auto loot. My suggestion is the same as it was the last time we covered this game, and I think this is a good suggestion. So instead of forcing the player to loot every single thing that is laying on the ground with like an outline like this, instead what I would recommend is allow the player to loot nodes. So things like treasure chests, things like weapon racks, that's perfectly fine. Looting those things is cool. However, when you kill an enemy, there should be a loot explosion, little motes of colors. So if a white item or a green item or a blue item or a purple item or a legendary item drops, a mote, a ball of light that color should fly out of the body, lay on the ground for a second, and then suck into the player and make like a satisfying jingling noise or crunching noise or, chainmail sounding noise as it enters your inventory. And then it would pop up inside your text log right there. That would save the player a whole bunch of F spamming to loot things. And I think it would also make the game feel a lot better to play. And so that was a suggestion I had the last time we checked out the game. Unfortunately, it hasn't been implemented yet, but I have found the endless repetition of looting bodies on the ground, especially in really mob-dense areas, like as you get further towards, oh, this guy's a boss, huh? All right, let me heal myself real fast. Would you like one of these? Here, take one of those straight to your dome piece. Straight to your dome. Oh, man is just shooting me right now. All right, let's drop one of those on him. Drop one of those on him. There is no mana in this game. This game is entirely cooldown based, in case you were wondering. So there is going to be no resource management while you're playing the game. You just kind of have to keep an eye on your meters and see when abilities come back up so that you can spam them. There do seem to be a decent amount of abilities. I think my character's got like 8 abilities or 9 abilities right now at level 5, which is pretty good. Most of them are not useful because I'm playing a cleric, and the cleric is like the obvious co-op class. So I'm supposed to be healing other players and stuff, and so they gave me a bunch of varieties of heals and things that unfortunately I haven't been utilizing too much because I've been doing mostly solo play this entire time. But you do get new abilities when you unlock stuff, and I'm sure you get a lot more sort of focused violence as you're playing as like a berserker, or if you're playing as something like a wizard. I think we're supposed to drop down right here, but it's kind of hard to say. Yeah, I think we are. I mean, there's loot and stuff down here. It can be kind of difficult to tell. There's no big map for this game. You've only got like a little mini map. I don't think the little mini-map existed the last time I played the game. I think that's a concession from the developers, but in fact, I think the mini-map is a really good choice, because when your dungeon is just like a never-ending list of T-junctions and things going left, right, up, right, down, it's very easy to get super disoriented in this game. And so the mini-map has been of tremendous help in that regard, giving you just enough localized information to where you can kind of get breadcrumbs to figure out the next area where you want to go. A bigger map for like the entire dungeon, I think I would probably appreciate, because I've never been one of those guys that finds wandering around in circles to be a tremendously satisfying dungeon crawling experience. But after having looked at the forums, I think like there are merits to not having a map. I mean, there was kind of like, if I remember correctly, there was no map back in the day for like dead mines and stuff either, unless they data mined it. Like, I don't remember, it's been a long time since Vanilla WoW. 2006 was a long time ago. Anyways, I don't recall if Dungeons had a map in World of Warcraft, but World of Warcraft seems to be a big influence on this game. But I like the mini-map, and I'm glad that they added it. I think it helps on out. Wow, we're like in like a little ogre area right here. I would like to see kind of like the threat of the enemies increased. I'd like to see them do a little bit more sophisticated stuff right now. At the moment, they don't do anything, even the bosses don't really seem to do anything more complicated than basic leash and smash. A lot of the time that you would see in any given game like Lotro or, you know, some. Honestly, what this kind of feels like is a less sophisticated single-player Elder Scrolls Online with Diablo 2 loot trappings. That's kind of like the feeling and the vibe that I get from it. But the general thing that I've settled on with Dungeons of Sundaria is that, like, it's fine. Like, is this a game that's tremendously great and it's going to stand the test of time like Dwarf Fortress 20 years from now? Absolutely not. In fact, what I would kind of compare it to is back before there was Divinity Original Sin and Larian was a little tiny studio. They had a game called Divinity Ego Draconis. This game is kind of like Divinity Ego Draconis, in my opinion. It's not like a great game, it's not like a bad game. It's a perfectly satisfying loot-scooping, dungeon-crawling experience, even more so if you've got friends to play with so that your classes can bounce off of one another. If you find it entertaining to crawl through a dungeon for 2 hours at a time, unbroken with no load screens and nothing getting in the way of you just churning and burning through mobs, and you don't like, and the art in this game is good, the models look decent, the animations are solid. This is one of those games that like I'm very, very interested to see what the developers do next after they get done with this title. I'm also kind of interested in seeing what their later dungeons are going to look like and what their late game, like end game gameplay loop is going to look like, because you can see them iteratively getting better as you move through the dungeons. It's one of those games where you can tell, like, at the beginning they're kind of unsteady and they're just trying to get the basics down, but as you get further and further on in, like, the models get better and the animations get better and the dungeon design is getting better. Like, we're like probably a third of the way through the second dungeon right now would be my guess from the pacing of the first dungeon. And you can see them slowly, like, getting better. And so this is one of those games that really intrigues me because, like, I want to see what they do next. You know what I mean? Or I want to see what their dungeons look like 2 years from now when you're, like, really, really far into the game. The problem is you got to churn through all the old dungeons to get there, which is why I recommended going back and maybe updating some of the earlier bosses that are just very simple tank and spakes and whatnot. Might be a good idea to get people hooked that are into kind of that learning strategy of a raid boss type deal in MMO flavor. For now, this is Dungeons of Sundaria. I've kind of showed you what the adventuring looks like. Obviously, a lot of auto-attacking, killing lots of mobs, and then sifting through piles and piles and piles of loot to figure out what's an upgrade and what isn't an upgrade. I will now take you back to town. You don't get to, like, free roam around town in this game. That's not really a thing. There's just various places you can go. And make sure you click on the ones in the background too, because even though they're not highlighted by any lighting source or anything else like that a lot of the time, you can click on the little things in the background too. You've got a temple. This is where you can buy upgrades to your class. Like as you level up, you can buy new ranks of your abilities. that make them stronger. Don't necessarily get new abilities from there, but you do get higher ranks of the ones you already have. There's a blacksmith over on this side. You can trade in fragments with this guy in order to access the crafting pages. He will also sell you a whole bunch of random just things that you can pay him money for, blueprints, patterns, stuff like that. I haven't farmed the first dungeon enough yet on higher difficulties or whatever to get enough of the Dark Moon chain fragments to get the Dark Moon set taken care of just yet, but you can do that, and there's like a major set for every single dungeon that sort of matches the aesthetic of the dungeon, I guess. This little guy over here will allow you to re-dye your clothing and make yourself look like whatever you want to look at. This lady upgrades something. I don't know. I couldn't get it to work. It says to hit the space bar in order to do the upgrades, but everything's grayed out here, and as of yet, I haven't had anything that is not grayed out in that menu, so I'm not exactly sure what it's good for. Over here, you can buy food. Food gives you buffs for like 30 minutes when you're in a dungeon. Like I said, very, very MMO inspired. You can tell that these developers like MMOs a lot, but they wanted to make like a small party dungeon crawling type deal that focuses on the things they liked best about MMOs, which appears to be small group content. This guy is just the main quest giver, so on and so forth. You've got this guy over here who allows you to, I think, actually change your race if you want to as well. You could be like a dwarf if you want to. There's elves, there's halflings, there's orcs. There's all kinds of dudes around here that you can play as. There's goblins, just in case you enjoy that. They look like little crack fiends. You can also go back out, and there's a guy that'll sell you healing potions and other stuff. Pretty simple game. As of right now, it looks like there are like 8 dungeons from what I can see so far. And if each dungeon is as long as the first one, so I did the Crypt of Horrors over here, and we're about halfway through the Dark Holler over here. And so if each one is like an hour and a half to 2 hours long, like the Crypt of Horrors was, I'm guessing that you've got yourself like a solid 12 hours of gameplay. I think there's also like difficulty levels. Yeah, you can also crank up the difficulty levels too. So technically, these are all playable 3 times with different scaling enemies if the game really bites you. But yeah, this is Dungeons of Sundaria. A perfectly competent, if somewhat... Well, yeah, we'll resume from where we were going. I didn't know that that was a feature. Nice. I did the other one unbroken, so it is nice that I can pick up the dungeon from wherever I was, or like my most recent checkpoint. That's actually really nice quality of life. I fully expected to have to go back through and play through the whole thing again. Nice, dude. That's actually pretty cool. But Dungeons of Sundaria. It is... Oh, all my hotkeys are gone. Why are all my hotkeys gone? I don't think it's a game that's gonna 100% like blow your hair back and change the world of RPGs forever. But I do think it's fun to play. I do think it's enjoyable. Will you get like 150 million hours out of it? Feels kind of unlikely to me. But, you know, I have enjoyed my time with it. Then again, I think I'm kind of predisposed towards games like Diablo and whatnot that drop procedural loot at me. And that happens to be one of the reasons why I love Tales of Maj'Eyal as well, is because I think Tales of Maj'Eyal sort of perfected itemization in video games, where every single item you can see potential builds in and whatnot. But my name is Splattercat. I sift through the pile to find what's worthwhile in the world of indie games every single day so that you don't have to. Today up on the chopping block, we were checking back in after a year with Dungeons of Sundaria, which has had a couple of new dungeons added to it since the last time we played around with it. I wanted to update my thoughts about it. Most of my issues, I think, with this game are going to revolve around the bosses being far too simple tank and spank, and they don't have enough of like a emergent strategy going to them. I think the other half would more than likely be the itemization could be a little bit better and a little bit more unique instead of just a bunch of passive 1% and things of that nature. Stuff like chain lightning bouncing in between enemies, and when that chain lightning procs, you have the ability, you know, to have one of your abilities go off automatically off of that proc. There's not a lot of character building here. There's not a lot of interesting things that I've seen so far with the items. Mostly linear increases, and I think that could be done quite a bit better. However, the voice acting in the game, the dungeon design, the fights, things like that have all been enjoyable. And so I would stack this up to a solid like Saturday, Sunday afternoon killer if you got a little bit of extra money laying around and you just kind of want to churn your way through some mobs with some friends. I will see you all later. Thank you for stopping on in. My name is Splattercat. I sift through the pile to find what is worthwhile in the world of indie games every single day so that you don't have to. Today up on the chopping block, we were fooling around with Dungeons of Sundaria. Tomorrow we will be screwing around with something else. A never-ending stream of fun things to play around here. I will catch you all then. Take care, and thank you for the luxury of your time.